Have you held any stock in any companies founded in China?
I don't believe so.
Well, you do own stock in a company known as Elite Depot, don't you?
I think that's, I'll have to get back to you. I think it's a law firm and it's a company out of Singapore.
Okay, well, no, the company out of Singapore, which is owned by Elite Depot, is the Shein company.
Imagine walking into a congressional hearing room and watching the man in charge of America's top domestic intelligence agency get asked one brutally simple question. Why is the FBI director still tied to a company linked to China, while the FBI is supposed to be hunting Chinese espionage? That is not a small clerical problem. That is not some dusty disclosure form sitting in a government database. That is a flashing red light on the dashboard of public trust. And when Representative Hank Johnson pressed FBI Director Kash Patel over stock connected to Elite Depot, Shein, and a reported value of up to $5 million, the room did not feel like routine oversight anymore. It felt like a courtroom where the defendant was not a policy, not a party, but the credibility of the FBI itself. Johnson began with the frame that almost nobody in Washington publicly disputes. China and the Chinese Communist Party are viewed as one of America's greatest national security threats. Patel agreed with the broad point. China wants dominance, economically and militarily, and the FBI has a central role in fighting espionage, intellectual property theft, data theft, and foreign influence. So Johnson's logic was sharp because it was simple. If the FBI director leads the agency responsible for investigating those threats, then any personal financial interest connected to that same ecosystem becomes more than a private investment. It becomes a question of judgment. And this is where the exchange started to tighten. Patel did not fully accept Johnson's description of the company as Chinese. He leaned on the idea that the Department of Justice had reviewed his disclosures and allowed certain holdings. But Johnson was not only asking whether a lawyer approved the paperwork, he was asking whether the American people should accept the image of the nation's top FBI official, holding a valuable stake while claiming total independence from the very threat environment his bureau is supposed to police. That is the real issue, not just legality, credibility. Johnson's strongest move was not the accusation. It was the order in which he built it. First, he got Patel to agree that China is a major national security threat. Then he got Patel to acknowledge that China wants dominance, not friendship, not fair competition, not some harmless trade relationship, but dominance over the United States and the world. Then Johnson placed the financial disclosure on the table like evidence bag number 1, Elite Depot, Shein, a company founded in China, linked through corporate structure, relocation, tax strategy, and ownership questions, with Patel's stake valued up to $5 million. And suddenly, the hearing stopped sounding like politics and started sounding like a conflict of interest exam that nobody in power wanted to take out loud. This is where the logic became dangerous for Patel, because Patel's answer was technically shaped, carefully defensive, and legally padded. He said he disagreed with calling it a Chinese company. He said the Department of Justice reviewed what he submitted during confirmation. He said the DOJ made the call on what he could and could not possess. That may answer a compliance question, but it does not answer the public trust question. And that is the crack Johnson drove the truck through. Because there is a difference between I was allowed to hold it and the American people should have no concern that I hold it. Those are not the same sentence. Those are not even the same moral universe. One is paperwork. The other is judgment. Johnson's argument was not that Patel secretly hid a stock certificate under the table. His argument was sharper, even when disclosed, even when reviewed, even when technically permitted. A financial stake can still create the appearance of divided loyalty when the officeholder is responsible for policing the exact national threat connected to that stake. That is why Johnson used the fox guarding the henhouse comparison. It was not elegant. It was not subtle. But it landed because everyone understands the image. You do not put the person with a financial interest near the thing the public needs protected, then tell people to calm down because the paperwork was filed correctly. That is like hiring a casino inspector who owns part of the slot machine company and then acting offended when gamblers ask whether the game is clean. Maybe the inspector follows the rules. Maybe the inspector never touches the machine. But the point is obvious. The public should not have to perform legal gymnastics just to believe the referee is neutral. And Patel's weakest moment was that he kept fighting the label instead of confronting the trust problem. He disputed whether the company should be called Chinese. He pointed toward DOJ review. He said he did not follow the stock closely, but Johnson was not asking for a geography lesson or a portfolio management lecture. Johnson was asking why the FBI director would remain financially attached to a company surrounded by the very concerns the FBI is supposed to investigate: intellectual property theft, counterfeit products, data risk, economic espionage, and corporate ties in an authoritarian threat environment. That is the internal contradiction. The FBI director cannot stand before Congress and say China is a severe national security threat, then treat his own China-linked financial exposure like a harmless footnote. A threat for the nation cannot become a technicality for the director. A risk for American companies cannot become a shrugged-off asset on a personal disclosure. A national security concern cannot be serious when it applies to everybody else, and conveniently complicated when it reaches the person sitting at the witness table. And then Johnson tightened the pressure with the most practical question of all: why are you holding on to it? That question mattered because it removed the fog. Not what did the DOJ allow? Not what is the exact corporate registration? Not whether the headquarters moved from China to Singapore or Taiwan or somewhere else for tax purposes. Why keep it? Because at some point, ethics is not just about what you can legally survive. It is about what you voluntarily give up because the office is bigger than your portfolio. That is the moral line Johnson was drawing, and Patel never fully crossed it. He defended permission. He defended characterization. He defended procedure. But he did not give the answer that would have ended the room. I will remove even the appearance of conflict because the FBI's credibility matters more than my private financial upside. That silence was louder than the argument. Because in a hearing like this, what is not said often becomes the evidence. Then the hearing swerved into an even darker lane, and that is where the room stopped being only about money. Johnson moved from China-linked stock and national security optics into one of the ugliest accusations a public official can face. Why are you hiding, shielding, or protecting pedophiles? That line was not just aggressive. It was explosive because the moment those words entered the room, Patel was no longer defending a disclosure form. He was defending the moral legitimacy of the FBI under his leadership. And Patel's reaction showed exactly why that question hit a nerve. He called it one of the most offensive things that could be said to him, then reached for numbers: a 33% increase and 1,500 child predators arrested in 7 months. On the surface, those numbers sound like a shield. 33% sounds like momentum. 1,500 arrests sounds like proof of action. But in a prosecutorial reading of the exchange, numbers are not magic. Numbers are evidence only when they are tied to origin, timing, method, and accountability. That is where the argument became more complicated, because the counterpoint in the room was that many of those investigations may have been initiated under the previous director, meaning Patel could not simply hold up the final result and pretend the entire machinery began when he walked into the building. This is the part the audience needs to understand clearly. A law enforcement agency does not operate like a light switch. Cases do not appear from nowhere because a new director gives a tough answer in Congress. Child exploitation investigations take time. Digital evidence, warrants, agents, task forces, prosecutors, and often months or years of groundwork before an arrest becomes a headline. So when Patel cited the 1,500 arrests, the unanswered question was not whether those arrests matter. Of course they matter. Every predator taken off the street matters. Every child protected matters. Every case that prevents more harm matters. But the moral problem is this: you cannot use victims as a political body armor suit while refusing to clarify how much credit belongs to current leadership and how much belongs to work already underway before you arrived. That is not defending children. That is borrowing the suffering of children to escape a harder question. And this is where the hearing exposed a pattern. On the stock issue, Patel leaned on DOJ review. On the child predator question, he leaned on arrest numbers. On the counterintelligence issue, he leaned on a 33% increase. Each answer had a surface-level defense, but each answer also avoided the deeper question of institutional trust. Are the numbers being used to explain reality or to blur responsibility? Are the disclosures being used to prove transparency or to hide behind process? Are public safety achievements being presented with full context or converted into a shield against oversight? That distinction matters because the FBI is not a campaign office. It is not supposed to be a personal reputation machine. It is supposed to be a federal law enforcement institution with enough credibility that citizens can believe its victories are real, its investigations are fair, and its director is not twisting statistics just to win a 5-minute exchange. And then, outside the hearing room, the pressure widened again. The reports describe Patel allegedly ordering polygraph tests for more than 24 current and former staff after damaging media coverage about his conduct, including claims about drinking, missed meetings, and use of federal resources for personal purposes. Patel denied those allegations and filed a massive defamation lawsuit, but the optics were already bleeding into the same credibility crisis. Because when an FBI director accused of misconduct is then reported to be using internal pressure tools to identify sources, the public sees something dangerous. They see the possibility that law enforcement power is being redirected inward, not to protect the country, but to protect the boss. And that is the real connective tissue between the hearing and the later reports. The question is not whether every accusation against Patel is automatically true. The question is whether the most powerful law enforcement institutions in America are being run with clean judgment, clean motives, and clean boundaries. Because once the FBI director appears to treat oversight as an attack, disclosures as technicalities, statistics as shields, and internal tools as personal weapons, the country has a bigger problem than one ugly hearing. It has a trust crisis wearing a government badge. And this is why the ending cannot be reduced to one man, one stock holding, one defensive answer, or one ugly accusation in a hearing room. The deeper lesson is that public trust is not destroyed only by proven crimes. Sometimes it is destroyed by a pile of technically explainable choices that all point in the same direction. A stock holding that may have been disclosed, a conflict that may have been reviewed, a number that may be accurate, a polygraph order that may be defended internally. But when all of those things gather around the same official, the public does not see clean leadership. The public sees a system asking for trust while refusing to behave in a way that earns it. That is my real problem with this moment. Powerful officials always seem to understand ethics when they are judging someone else. They know exactly what looks bad when it belongs to a rival. They know exactly what sounds suspicious when it benefits the other side. But when the same standard walks into their own office, suddenly everything becomes complicated, technical, procedural, reviewed, approved, misunderstood, taken out of context. That is not accountability. That is the language of escape dressed up as governance. And the FBI cannot afford that. Not because the FBI is perfect. It is not. Not because every critic is fair. They are not. But because the FBI carries the power to investigate citizens, pursue spies, arrest predators, pressure insiders, and shape the public meaning of national security. A director of that institution should not need 5 layers of legal explanation before ordinary Americans can believe his judgment is clean. The real victim here is not just a political opponent embarrassed in a hearing. The real victim is the citizen who still wants to believe that the law applies upward, not just downward. The mother waiting for a child exploitation case to be taken seriously. The business owner whose intellectual property was stolen. The agent inside the bureau who needs leadership, not paranoia. The voter watching this spectacle and wondering whether public service still means sacrifice or just survival. So the final question is simple. If the people trusted to guard the system treat trust like a technicality, how long before the public stops believing in the system